Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the 50th edition of Data Bytes, the Big 5-0, hosted for the first time by Public Digital. Public Digital in the house tonight, clearly. I'm Gavin Freeguard, and it's wonderful to see so many of you this evening here at Broadway House and joining us online. What an uplifting day to relaunch the series. I should stress that that timer is counting down to the end of my speaking slot. It's not a live feed of the doomsday clock. I could see a few of you were looking a bit worried about that. Let's start in the usual way. Hands up if you've been to Data Bytes before. Welcome back. Hands up if this is your first Data Bytes. Welcome. And hands up if this is your first Public Digital Data Bytes. Yes, as you may have noticed, after 49 events and 199 different speakers going back to April 2019, Data Bytes has moved from the Institute for Government to Public Digital. We have a shiny new venue. We have a shiny new look. We have a shiny new timer. And the same increasingly faded old host. Thank you. Now, some other things haven't changed. I'd like to reassure the person who, when asked when signing up for today whether they had any questions, inquired whether my jokes had improved. I sincerely hope not. And I'd like to reassure anyone worried that now Data Bytes is being hosted by a private company, it will turn into a sales pitch for Public Digital. It absolutely will not. Now, let's kick off with some housekeeping. We are on the record and are being live streamed, obviously. If you're still on social media of some description, the hashtag is PDDataBytes, and we're on Blue Sky at Public Digital. And you can put your questions to our speakers via Slido, bit.ly/databytes50, all lowercase. And if you're here in the room, you can, of course, raise your hand as well. What does Data Bytes do? Well, we aim to put good work involving data on the record so we can all learn from it, provide a space for the different data communities in and around government to come together, and bring to life what better data can do for all of us, whether we think of ourselves as data people or not. How does Data Bytes work? This evening, you're going to be treated to 4 presentations on interesting data projects. Each of our speakers will have 8 minutes to present. Yes, just 8 minutes. There are 8 bits in a byte, hence 8 minutes in a data byte. Each speaker will then take questions for 8 minutes. Yes, just 8 minutes. And then we'll move on to the next speaker. So 4 presentations of 8 minutes, each followed by questions for 8 minutes. This is the 50th Data Bytes event and the first at Public Digital. You can watch the previous 49 over on the IFG website, bit.ly/IFG Databytes, capital IFGDB. Now, for those of you new to Data Bytes, lucky you, I usually kick off by looking at what's happened in politics and government since the last Data Bytes with some funny charts, or trying to be funny charts. So what's happened in politics and government since we last met back in March, 233 days ago? Well, you may have noticed there was a general election and it marked something of a, what's the word? Yes, departure from what had been before. Now, to give some sense of that, here's a chart with the result of the 2019 election. Those bars are actually made up of a thin line representing every parliamentary seat, and they're arranged from the most marginal for each party on the left right through to their safest seats with the biggest majority on the right. Now, if we colour those seats by what happened to them in 2024, you can see just how many of those Tory seats fell, particularly to Labour, and including some of their very safest seats. A bad night for the SNP as well, but even Labour didn't have it all their own way, notably losing several seats to pro-Gaza independents. It was the lowest Conservative share of the vote since at least the First World War, their worst ever in terms of number of seats. You can also see the impact of our electoral system there. Labour winning 63% of the seats on just 34% of the vote. Now, for many, that result promised to bring some political calm after several years of political chaos. Great for the country, less great for my Data Bytes introductions. What would there be for me to make charts and make fun out of? Well, it turns out making political integrity a key part of your election pitch was something of a sausage to fortune. Now, I should make it clear to any Labour MPs watching, Data Bites is free to attend. There's no need to declare anything except your love of data. Now, the various unravelling scandals and stories eventually put paid to the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff. Less 50 shades than 93 days of grey, with similar levels of self-flagellation, if a less effective whipping operation. Now, 93 days is pretty short compared to previous post-election Downing Street Chiefs of Staff, but actually not that unusual by recent standards. Now, the new government has actually got stuck into a fair bit since coming into office, not least around data, including a new digital centre of government taking shape, budget announcements and various bills on data and AI, which I'm sure we'll return to in the coming months and indeed minutes. Now, if those are some of the consequences of one election, then there is, of course, another we can't ignore any longer. It had us gripped for months. Would a controversial right-winger triumph, and what would the consequences be? Well, now we know. Yes, the Conservative Party leadership contest is finally over. MPs whittled down 6 candidates to 3. After a strong party conference, James cleverly leapt into the lead. But after parts of the so-called most sophisticated electorate in the world apparently tried to vote too cleverly by attempting to knock some of his opponents out, he fell at the final hurdle before it went to the Tory membership. That's where Kemi Badenoch triumphed over Robert Jenrick in the closest membership ballot to date. Now, if we adjust the bars to reflect the size of the voting membership, you can see the shrinking number of Tory members as well, down to under 100,000 now. It'll be interesting to see which direction Kemi Badenoch takes the party in. If one diagram from her campaign is anything to go by, we may be in for an interesting realignment of left and right. Now, turning to tonight, we have a brilliant roster of speakers to restart the Data Bites series. Now, some of you may be unfortunate enough to remember Data Bites 16 in February 2021, the height of the sea shanty bubble, when I sang one about the National Data Strategy and my excitement that we may soon get a government chief data officer. Well, I'm delighted to say, a mere 1,372 days later, #impact, our first speaker tonight is Government Chief Data Officer Craig Suckling on whole-of-system change for data sharing. He'll be followed by Nicola Fulton of the ONS on the forthcoming UK Statistics Assembly. We'll then have Ryan Dunn from DWP Digital on developing a value framework to support decision-making with data as part of delivering the DWP Data Strategy. And to finish the evening and properly hand over the Data Bites baton, or at least clicker, we'll hear from the Institute for Government's Philip Nye and Finn Baker on the IFG's new Ministers database. The next Data Bites will be on Wednesday, the 4th of December, and we have dates confirmed well into the new year. We've got some brilliant speakers on a variety of topics lined up, including in December, Anna Tritch-Kine from the London Borough of Hounslow on the benefits of data practitioners networks for local authorities, and then next year, the Scottish Government on their vision for public sector data, Cabinet Office on the digital heap, and Laura Gilbert from the Incubator for AI and 10DS, among others. If you work for a public sector organisation and would like to speak or know someone who should, come and speak to me afterwards or email events@public.digital. Now, that's more than enough from me. In fact, I've run over in a really bad example to everybody else already, but it gives me great pleasure to introduce our first speaker this evening, Craig. Thank you.
Thanks, Gavin. And, following on from that sea shanty, I have promised that Gavin and I will do a new version of that, either in a rap or a K-pop genre. So look forward to doing that soon as well. It's great to be at Data Bites. It's my first Data Bites, and I'm glad the clock hasn't... Oh, it just started. OK, fine. Let's get moving. I'm going to talk about whole-of-system change today. My role is Government Chief Data Officer. I sit within CDDO in DCIT as part of the new Digital Centre for Government. And a lot of the focus of my role is very much around how we can start to drive real transformation across the public sector and into the UK economy by doing more with our public sector data. I'm a real big advocate and a strong convict of the fact that our public sector data assets are probably government's most underutilized and highly valued assets. There's a huge amount of value that we can unlock if we do more with that in 3 key areas. The first is if we are able to start to deliver more trusted, secure, ethical access to public sector data assets into the economy. We can drive innovation. We can really start to create attractive conditions for investment in the UK, for companies to come and do things like build AI solutions and a bunch of other things like research. And there's about £20 billion worth of benefit we can deliver to the UK economy with public sector data and AI. We can also transform public services by unlocking data and having it in closer proximity to the services that we are modernizing with digital across government as well. And we need to do more to deliver on better cross-government collaboration and working. And data remains the biggest barrier still to that. If we can start to deliver on better sharing of data between departments, we can really drive effective change in how we collaborate across government. And there's a productivity business case of about £3 to £4 billion a year that we can improve on if we do more with data sharing. But it's difficult, right? And it really requires whole of system change. More than just implementing technology, we need to focus on how we can shift culture. And culture, when we think about that, is a shifted mindset towards one where teams and departments are focused on more than just their own priorities, but thinking about the citizens and the businesses' priorities that go across departments more widely. It's focused on shifting our appetite for risk as well, to take more meaningful, more calculated risks that are non-regrettable, that allow us to move faster. And we need to fix and think about different mechanisms for incentivizing change as well. A lot of the times we are disincentivized to share data rather than incentivized. And this requires us to think differently about policy, about legislation, about other ways for us to strengthen how we think about change. And there's been great work that started with things like the algorithmic transparency recording standard, which allows for public citizens to be able to have transparency into where algorithms are used in departments, so that we can start to really drive better, stronger trust across the system as well. Skills are really important. We're working a lot on strengthening skills. We recently launched a new apprenticeship scheme called Tech Track. We had 10,000 applicants in 2 weeks into Tech Track. So there's a lot of appetite to actually have digital and data skills in government. We need to do more around that. And yes, technology does matter. Things like our cloud-first policy are starting to drive more migration of legacy onto more flexible, scalable, resilient solutions on cloud. Trust is going to be imperative for change. Trust with citizens, but also trust so that those people that are producing data trust that it's being used well elsewhere. And those that are consuming data have trust in where it's coming from and that it's of high quality and free of things like bias. So very important. Then finally, we have to coordinate. We have to actually focus. And we have this opportunity now in a mission-based government where we can start to come together across these missions, across departments, to really think about focusing on change. So a lot of different ways to think about whole of system approach, focused on all these things to get it working collectively. I want to talk about the National Data Library because this has been a big vision and ambition that's really focused on data sharing. And Peter Kyle, our Secretary of State for the Department of Science, Innovation and Tech, has this really strong vision around managing public sector data as a national strategic asset. We're focused on mobilizing up. This is a program of work that will really seek to unlock the value of data across the public sector and into the economy. He talks about replacing chaos with coordination, confusion with coherence, and really focusing on maximizing the value of data for public good. So a strong ambition, and we're thinking about how we start to unlock what we're talking about as an ecosystem of data across the public sector. One which looks at, curating data from central government, from arm's length bodies, from local authorities, from public sector organizations, and making that available to a broad set of users through trusted, secure, and ethical access to data through some minimal centralized services. Importantly, this is all about keeping data where it sits, within departments, rather than creating monolithic, centralized stores of data, but empowering departments to open up access in the right ethical, trusted, and secure way, so we can really drive wholesale innovation, productivity gains, acceleration of value and transformation across the system. So that's what the National Data Library is all about, and it will focus on delivering really useful things like working with the Department for Education to unlock educational data that we can make accessible in the right anonymized, safe way to edtech startups, so they can build more personalized AI products that we can deploy back into schools to break down barriers of opportunity for all learners and create better examples of learning. And there's a ton of other examples like that, but we're really focused on value cycles that deliver back benefit to society through unlocking our public sector data assets through the National Data Library as well. So what does success look like? How are we starting to think about this data sharing? Making sure that one is really staying focused on public trust and open discourse, making sure that we are continuing to have strong transparency in how we are thinking about doing more with public sector data. The second is very strong collaboration and coordination. Like I was saying earlier, we're focused on a federated, decentralized system of change that allows for people to have more ownership of their data and make it more accessible, and that requires really strong collaboration across the public sector. But it also requires for us to partner very much with private sector around how we start to think about data that's useful for the economy. We have this really big vision, but we're taking a focused start as well. We need to stay focused on what are the priorities of our citizens, of our businesses, and how can data help to improve the lives of people in the UK through what we do with it. So focusing on that, and then scaling iteratively. And then finally, we need to have autonomy with uniformity. There is so much variety of data, so many teams, so many departments. They need to have the independence to act autonomously, but we need to have a high standard, a high bar of how we think about things like privacy, quality, security, ethics. And that needs to be a standard practice, a standard set of policy that everybody can leverage so that people can run quick but do so at high quality. So those are the ways that we're thinking about success. And I'm hopefully right on time because we have 20 seconds left as we go. How's that?
You've got 20 seconds to wrap if you'd like to.
Do you want to start?
Absolutely not. Great, thank you very much. I was asking for trouble there, really, wasn't I?
Yes.
We're going to go to questions now. If you're in the room, please do tell us who you are if you can. Remember, we are on the record. Please wait for the mic, and please do keep your questions short, as the timer will start with the first question, so you will be up against the clock. If you're watching online, or if you're in the room with a question that you don't want to say out loud, it's bit.ly/databytes50, all lowercase. Who'd like to ask the first question of Data Bytes 50? Got one right down here at the front, and I'll come to you after a couple of online questions.
Thanks very much. Paul Atherton, fellow at the Royal Society of Arts. Obviously, the hardest thing to overcome is going to be the culture clash.
Yeah.
How do you intend to address that?
Yeah. I think of it as kind of like a top-down and a bottom-up approach. And what I mean by that is there needs to be strong ministerial, PermSec support advocating for the change. We need to do things that help to drive more mandated kind of like shift in mindset, things like strengthening policy, looking where we need to think about strengthening legislation. But that's not enough. We also need to help and work with departments at a grassroots level to help them to build capability, helping to work with departments to modernize their data technology, to inject the right skills, to allocate more funding so that they can actually build and unlock their data. And it's only by doing it in those two collective ways that we can really shift the culture, by having that strong messaging top down, that we must be open, we must be sharing more, but also then providing the right capability to do it.
Great, thank you. I'm going to go online for the next question. We'll come to you after that. Anonymous, good evening to you, Anonymous. Delighted that you've made the journey from the Institute for Government with us. What is the intended approach to regularly track levels of public trust in government data and in government use of data? And I'll just link another question to that as well, which is somebody says, again, Anonymous, maybe a different one, arguably there is too much data sharing across government departments that people in the data know nothing about. Before doing more, what will you do to tell people? It's quite a strong theme around trust.
Yeah. Yeah, like I was saying, trust is probably the most important foundational aspect to this. There's a few different things to get right. The first is having very strong, regular, open public discourse around what we do, ensuring that we are engaging with our citizens around, where we are looking at public sector data for accessibility. There's also a piece around, especially when it applies directly to citizen-related data, ensuring that they have control of their data, that there is consent mechanisms in place so that they can opt in for where they want their data to be utilized. And we see work like One Login, where that's been working very well, around having a consent-based mechanism for people to opt in for when they are uniquely identified. And then having strong transparency and explainability around where data is as well. And there's features of trust around that, where we are sharing data, using data, ensuring, and this builds on the algorithmic transparency recording standard to allow for people to have a place where they can have that transparency of use as well. So those are some of the things. I'm sure there's a bunch of other things, but it's a multifaceted challenge that we have to lean into.
Great, thank you. And on the tracking public trust, we've had presentations in the past at Data Bytes from the Public Attitudes to Data and AI Tracking Survey, which I think DCIT is still running, so do check that out. We had a question down here, so yes, lady over there.
Hi, Cam Gavin from UK Parliament. I've got two questions. You can choose which one you want to answer. The first is, what's your timeline? How can we get involved? I'm particularly interested in benchmarking on data. I know it's a bit difficult for Parliament, that's why I want to ask. The second thing is, how are you going to deal with the conflicts of definitions and controls? For example, I've recently been working and doing some work with local government as well, where they have such different ways of working within organisations that the definitions must be different, and the content of account. How are you going to cope with that? So, either question.
Two good questions. I can probably answer both, hopefully. I think we're just getting started with the first discovery phase on this. We'll be launching Call for Evidence and other pieces of work around this. And so we will be reaching out to really make sure we have a broad set of contributors into this. And the timings for this, it's going to be a multi-year program, right? It's going to take a lot of time. Our scope and ambition is very broad, so it's going to take multiple years to be able to unlock all access. In terms of definitions, this comes back to this strong uniformity in standards. This is building on foundations we're already doing in CDDO, like metadata standards and frameworks for how we think about definitions of data. What does a good essential shared data asset look like with our ESDA policy? And how we start to do more of that so that people have those mechanisms to leverage when they think about structuring data in a very uniform way.
Excellent, thanks. I'm going to go online for the next one. So this is anonymous again. How is the National Data Library different to previous attempts like data.gov.uk, Administrative Data Research UK, the ONS Integrated Data Sharing Platform, etc.?
Yeah, I get this question a lot.
I thought
So I'm aware there's a lot of great data sharing that's happening across government today. And one of the things, with the National Data Library as an overall initiative is to actually start to create more collaboration and connectivity where there's good sharing happening, and then help for that to be surfaced in a more uniform way as well. We're also looking and learning from the past, and we know that there have been mistakes on data sharing in the past that we are going to be careful to make sure that we think about differently as well. And so, some of our principles that I mentioned earlier around decentralization, around having strong trust, around investing into departments to help to up-level capability, are things that we've learned from previous solutions that didn't work well, or they did the opposite of that, I should say. So taking those lessons, understanding where there is good sharing happening today to interoperate with that and make sure we create more of a macro set solution that unlocks wholesale change.
Great, thank you. We've definitely got time for another one in the room. I'm going to go second row back. I'll try and fit the other two in, but I probably won't. Sorry.
Thank you. I'm Rachel, largely independent. How do you plan on coping with the large-scale asymmetry between the power and capacity of the technology firms, who I'm sure are falling over themselves to help you, and the perhaps underfunded UK public service?
Yeah, so one of our principles on this is that we need to have high resilience and variability across government to avoid things like vendor lock-in, right? So when we think about how we deliver on this change, we're focused on creating a very variable set of technical solutions that have high interoperability. We'll be focused on dictating the standards and architectural principles rather than the vendors that are involved in this as a system, to make sure that we not only avoid things like vendor lock or too much investment from specific vendors, but also for the purpose of resiliency, one of the things when we think about our data is it needs to be highly protected. And we need to, one of the ways to go about doing that is to make sure that there is decentralized, highly variable sets of technology, so that if there is any threat to that, then people can only access a particular module rather than the whole thing.
Great. I'm going to squeeze a one-line question in.
Interesting, you're thinking about how to meet user needs in particular policy domains, if you like, with the balancing that with the need for a national infrastructure around the National Data Library.
So balancing policy with infrastructure.
So my example is from data.gov.uk,
Yeah.
lovely, but didn't really meet anyone's needs.
Right.
The MHCLG planning team, much more focused around a whole community and a set of real users. There's a tension between
Yes.
doing it for everybody and for a particular set of people.
So one of the things we're going to be intentional around is working backwards from what we see as useful and beneficial, and then actually taking a curated, targeted view to assets that we think are valuable, rather than just identifying anything that's available and bunging it up into a platform where people can see it. So it's going to be very much focused on outcomes, on where we can deliver on mission benefits, on where we can deliver on particular user benefit needs to be able to curate what we make available as an approach. Did I answer your question? Okay. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, Craig, thank you very much indeed.
Okay.
And our second speaker is Nicola.
Good evening, everybody. My name's Nicola Fulton, and it's really great to be here at my first in-person Data Bites, and thanks to Gavin and Public Digital. And now my eye is on that clock, that doomsday clock, but I'll try not go over. So I've been invited to talk about the first ever Statistics Assembly for the UK. The Statistics Assembly is hosted by the UK Statistics Authority, and we're doing it in partnership with the Royal Statistical Society as per the graphic. I'm actually from the Office for National Statistics External Affairs team, and we are very much doing a lot of the logistics because we're one of the bigger organisations within the UK stats system. So, before I talk too much in detail about the assembly and what it is and why we're running it, I thought it might be useful just to give a brief overview of the UK statistical system. When I started a couple of years ago, it was a slight sort of miasma, so I thought that might be just a good place to briefly start. So the UK Statistics Authority comprises a board and a chair, which is Sir Robert Choate, and then sort of key elements feed in and report into that authority board, including the National Statistician, Sir Ian Diamond, ONS, as I've mentioned, is one of the biggest producer and publisher of official statistics. You've got a range of government departments who also produce stats, known as the Government Statistics Service. And then, of course, you've got the three countries across the nations in Scotland, Wales and the Northern Ireland Executive. And then also feeding in is the Office for Statistics Regulation, who oversee, regulate, ensuring that stats are being produced in a way that is for the public good. And then, of course, you've got all the user communities, and in part that is, very much what the Assembly is seeking to do. So, on to why a Statistics Assembly? Well, I'm hoping that, given that we're all here for Data Bites, we have some agreement in the power of statistics and data as a really sort of powerful tool. Insights from statistics are used for economic policy, healthcare, schools planning, better understanding of populations. So there's many demands and many uses of statistics. last year, there was an independent review into the UK statistics system led by Professor Denise Leavesley. Her report was published earlier this year, and in it she recommended the need for the UK Statistics Authority Board to consult widely to understand and determine the UK statistics priorities and data needs. That was sort of her first recommendation from her report. And from that, she proposed establishing an assembly to enable wide-ranging discussions on user needs, strategic gaps and priorities. And I've put a link to that report, so you can see that when we share. So, what will the assembly look like? So, we're absolutely determined. If you sign up and there's details of how to do this, you're not going to be coming to a conference. It's not about us sort of doing a show and tell of lots of good things happening, though, you know, I'm hoping that will come through. But it's essentially going to be a day event in the end of January in London. But it will also be online for those who are not able to travel to London. And we're seeking a wide range of users and producers to come together to really discuss needs, priorities and gaps. Our approach has been to be really collaborative from the start. We want to ensure a diverse and inclusive event. So as well as partnering with the Royal Statistical Society, we've set up an assembly delivery group who we're designing the process with. That includes representatives from all sectors. So we've got UKRI, we've got Joseph Rowntree representing the charity sector, we've got British Chambers of Commerce representing business, we've got the Academy of Social Sciences, etc. We've got local government and reps from the Four Nations. And we're really deeply grateful for their input and their insights as we shape the assembly design, because it's the first time that any assembly for statistics has been done like this before. So it's very much something that we're designing and we're reflecting and we're learning as we go along. We've had a call for contributions, which actually closed at the weekend, and we've had a huge number of contributions in to really inform the agenda and the group discussions, which we're going through. I mean, that's what we're very much going through now, to really shape the agenda. And while the agenda, we've not published the agenda because we're looking at all the contributions that we've had in, where we've asked, you know, a cross-sector of users, producers and regulators to tell us what they would like to come to discuss. The agenda is likely to include up to 15 different discussion groups running concurrently throughout the day on topics, and they may be such as population migration, economic, health, care, skills, etc. You know, there are some really core statistics that we would be unlikely not to have as a key discussion topic, as well as cross-cutting themes, very much sort of linking into what Craig talked about around data linkage, around regional and local statistics, around quality, trust, and so on. So just to wrap up, who's the assembly for? Well, you know, it's for everyone. It's for you in the room and online. It's for users, producers and regulators. And we are specifically really seeking a very cross-sector representation from government, from business and industry, from civil society and charities, from research, education and so on. And then just to wrap up, so the Assembly's not just about turning up for a nice event and having a few sandwiches on the day. The chair of the UK Stats Authority Board has invited the National Statisticians Expert User Advisory Group to compile an advisory report from the Assembly, which will be presented back to the board That report is designed to inform short and longer term planning. And we hope that might also, given we are all working in a finite financial envelope, we're hoping that that might also help open up possibilities for other stats from other non-government sectors and indicate where some of those gaps might be. And then an annual public lecture will take place sort of next year where we will set out the work and the priorities from the Assembly. So, I realise I'm out of time, I'm bad, but what you can do, essentially, get involved, come along, you can register. I'm sharing some links in the next slide, and you can also flag that the Assembly is happening to colleagues who might be keen to participate. And here is just a wrap-up of some of the key points. So happy to take questions. And I've been told not to walk away with the clicker.
which I have definitely done in the past. Thank you very much, Nicola. And as Nicola was suggesting, the slides will be up on the Public Digital website post this event, so you will be able to follow the links through. A reminder for those of you, especially online, who'd like to ask questions, it's using Slido, bit.ly/databytes50 if you're not already there. I will start in the room with questions again, though. So who would like to ask the first one? We've got a hand right up there.
Hi, I'm Amber Della from the Institute for Government. Thank you for your talk. Given that the UKSA's mission is to ensure that statistics serve the public good, what are you doing to ensure that not only the most well-resourced and motivated users are attending the Assembly? Thank you.
Absolutely, yes, really good point. And so we are, me and my team, so at the moment we've got about 300 people who have signed up. Maybe more. And we are very much tracking across all those sectors to ensure that we have got good representation across both the UK, so geographically, across civil society, community groups, as well as public, local authority, and so on. And we're very much targeting our ongoing promotion where we might have less interest and less uptake from particular sectors. But this is very much about trying to encourage voices, including not the ones that we hear from a lot.
Yeah, in fact, we've got a very similar question online, which is, have you engaged with people who aren't statistics users, either to understand why they aren't users or to get their view on statistics for the public good?
Yeah, I mean, we understand that, a statistics assembly, it's not something that necessarily my mum might, come along to, though she's very welcome if she wants to and, probably dial in. But that's why we're absolutely, thinking about and trying to position this as not just being for analysts and statisticians, but very much for policymakers, service designers, planners, strategy, as well as, people in smaller charities, community groups who might not have, data insight teams, etc. We have an outreach and engagement team that we're working very closely with, and they do a lot of that liaison with frontline community, charities, etc.
Great, thank you. Let's come back into the room for the next question. I can see a hand up there.
Great, thanks. Matt Gerlog from the Blavatnik School of Government at University of Oxford, but formerly a government analyst for far too many years. I thought it was interesting seeing your stuff on the cross-cutting themes and the fact that skills wasn't in there. And I think there's both sort of from two sides of that. One, in terms of the skills within the statistical system and the government analytical function, might be that the Assembly is not the right place necessarily for that, but that's certainly in sort of my past experience been the fact that there's so much changing in the world of sort of technology and data science skills and others that producers don't necessarily have the sort of time to engage with. But then also on the user side, actually, especially in civil society, local authority base, actually the skills that end users have to support the further reuse of statistics and actually putting them into policy. So I thought it was interesting that that's missing at the moment from your list.
So the list that I put on that slide was very much a for example, but just to assure you, skills has come up significantly through our call for contributions, both in terms of statistics around sort of skills needed across society, as well as skills needed across policy and strategists and other public sector and non-public sector organisations to really drive the capacity and capability of data and statistical use, etc. Yeah. And sorry, your other... Okay, thank you.
Thanks. I'm going to go online for the next one. This is Anonymous again. Good evening again to you, Anonymous. The Leavesley review implied that there were many unmet needs across the user base. How do you manage the risk of generating a range of new unfunded asks?
Absolutely. We are well aware that we don't want the Assembly to essentially be, a huge big kind of Christmas wish list of lots of things that lots of people, would love. And, there's been sort of spending review settlements and further to come, but that producers, the statistical and analytical producers are working to finite resources like, across the whole of the public sector. We have been looking at how we prioritise and we've been thinking through that carefully. Part of why we did the call for contributions was so that we got a sense of what is it that really matters to people that they want to then come to the Assembly to discuss. So it's almost a funnel to then discuss in much more detail on the day. And we've been thinking really carefully, and we've been reaching out to others who do democratic participation and citizen assemblies to really think about how can we do this in a way that people leave the Assembly with a sense of, oh, okay, this Assembly has actually prioritised X, Y, Z, rather than leaving and thinking, well, that was nice and interesting, but what can we expect? So we're very alive to that, working through it, and it's what our delivery group, which I mentioned, is really supporting and helping us on as well, how we design this in a way that actually has some outcomes.
Excellent. I'll take another one from the room. Any hands going up in the room? There's one at the back there.
Thank you. I think you touched on this very briefly just then, but I was going to ask about how, whether Assembly members will just be discussing the issues or whether they'll also be discussing solutions, and how you're planning to kind of facilitate that discussion of solutions.
Absolutely, yeah. Again, how we structure and facilitate sort of up to 15 topic and theme discussions is something that we are thinking deeply about. And what we're looking to do is, where we've got topics and themes that through the call for contributions people really want to focus on, we almost want to position it as a question. So almost like a motion at, say, a party conference where people really discuss a question, and at the end of that discussion we would be hoping some consensus is reached. And it might be that the consensus is we can't reach a consensus, but that further work or further discussion or work outside the Assembly, alongside the Assembly, might need to be done on a particular area. But how we we're very aware that how we structure the discussions in a way that we have some meaningful, clear prioritisation. We're looking at different sort of ways to do that prioritisation. We'll be publishing the agenda mid-December, and that should be clear what those discussions and I'm hoping what the questions that people will come with. We're also inviting contributors to give evidence to those questions, to then enable the group to to take forward that discussion and to come up with what we hope would be some consensus. Consensus?
Consensuses.
Thank you.
Just before I release you back to the audience, Neil Townsend from the ONS has added something to Slido to say something else that the ONS has going on at the moment is a series of webinars to explain stats to non-expert users around bringing data to life. So again, we'll put a link to that in the blog post after this event. But until then, Nicola, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
And our next speaker is Ryan.
Thanks, Gavin. Hello everybody, I'm Ryan Dunn. I work in DWP Digital. For those who don't know, DWP is the UK's biggest public service department, serving around 20 million citizens, covering services and policy across working age, later life, children's. So, and we've got about 70,000 employees, so it's a big department with a lot of data activity going on. I'm going to cover a bit of background on our data strategy and how that's been delivered. I'm going to talk a little bit about the operating model around that and what that means specifically for my part of the department, which is Insight and Analytics. I've recently stepped into the role as the head of Insight and Analytics. I'll talk a little bit about what that means. And one of the initiatives I'm introducing to try and support the delivery of the data strategy, in particular what I'm calling the value framework, which is basically the connection between data and content and how we use that to support decisions. Thankfully, some of the things that Craig has covered, I'm hoping I'll touch on in here about, so starting with our ecosystem, a system thinking for decision making. The dreaded double diamond, so the formatting's jumped across there. So a lot of people talk about this, and I know different people have got different views about this, but I think it's a really helpful way of representing the ecosystem of decision making. So we have basically 3 levels of decision making in here: the strategy, design, and solution, and how information is used in different parts and how we expand that out from research and analysis perspective to do discovery and definition, and how we connect from our policy design and into service design. And then how towards the solution end of our, whether it's a system or whatever the solution is, we use analytics and insight to develop and deliver that, and we've got feedback loops within that. Across the spectrum along the bottom is where we get a lot of data from our systems and the solutions that we build. And that data is used both at a granular level. On the right-hand side, it's using calculations for individuals and services. But it's also used at the aggregate level, and it's used to underpin things like surveys. It's also used to underpin our research and analysis. It's used to underpin things like forecasting models and things like that. One day, we started modernizing all of our solutions, a lot of more digital solutions, and that totally changes the way that we think about that bottom right-hand side of this picture. So we start to get data out in a different way. We can then inform this system in a completely different way. It means things for automation, for integration, how we store, how we collect, a lot of the things that Craig was talking about before. And within the department, we've got a lot of modernization programs. So we've got health transformation, service modernization. We've got a lot of different stages of maturity of our service across this system. And so we've got to try to think about how we manage our data kind of flows within that, and how we start to introduce new things to support the new solutions. So to respond to that, we've introduced a DWP Data Strategy, and part of our DWP Data Strategy is the hub and spoke operating model, which starts to take into account how the kind of evolution of these things and how we can start to introduce in our data hub, and how we're reforming to start to develop and manage enterprise level policies, practices, patterns, products and platforms to introduce some of the stuff that Craig was talking about before, about how we start to bring some consistency to go with the autonomy that needs to take place within the spokes. So from a spoke perspective, that might be service spokes, so some of our health and work and age services. It might be some of our corporate spokes, so things like finance or people and things like that. And so part of our strategy is to start embedding data and analytics teams and practitioners into those spokes, so we can support them with the digital skills that they need with the solutions. And then from the hub, we can start to develop the patterns and platforms and other things that we need to develop. So what I'm doing as part of that is part of the area that I'm responsible is DWP-MI. So how do we put the management information structures, technologies, patterns and practices in place so we can bring the consistency, but also support the contextual situations of each of the services that we're building. So from a hub and spoke perspective, we can give the teams that autonomy, but also that alignment. The particular thing from DWP MI is what we're trying to do is, as best as possible, allow those spokes to self-serve, so to develop their own MI products, but also that they will be consuming those things almost from a self-service perspective as well. So one of the things I'm really thinking about is how I bring that data and content together, because the context of all of these things, where we've got different types of MI in both a service or corporate context, are very, very different. So what does that look like when we're bringing together a situation here where I've got I think there's about 1,200 developers of MI. We've got, we're serving about 90 different parts of the department, and I think everybody in DWP, I think now this week, everybody in DWP has a consumer license. So how do we make sure that we control all the production of this MI? So part of this is introduction of our value framework. So a value framework is a framework concept that we're using to support the description and the logical classification of content. So by content, we mean things like outcomes, hypotheses, measures, and metrics. In particular, metrics I'm interested in from an MI perspective. So we've got these 4 top-level kind of facets of experience, expenditure, efficiency, and effectiveness. They allocate kind of value in different ways. So this is about how well we manage our user interactions. So when we're building our services, what choices do we offer, how do we communicate, and how do we measure whether we're doing that well or not. From an expenditure perspective, you can see cost and savings, resources like time and technology. This is not a measurement framework. A measurement framework is where the consistency meets the context. So different areas will have measures and metrics in their own context. So a couple of examples from here. We can see the number of automated tasks in a particular instance might be a measure that's used for efficiency, because we're automating things so it saves time. Number of automated tasks might also be a measure for effectiveness in a different context, because it means we're removing human error, and therefore we expect we expect more accuracy or less inaccuracy. So what we're looking to do is work across the different areas to start to categorize the value in the context that people are developing their MI. So we can start to capture that information and understand the different ways that different data and metrics are being used in different contexts. So it's very early days. I've been in the role a short time, but the couple of the places that we've got this and kind of linked to the 3 big circles on the diagram at the bottom there is introducing into our DWP MI support hub a catalogue that starts to categorize our information in this way, so we can support that consistent structure. Crucially, we're not applying that in the context, we're applying a framework within which different contexts can live. The later life services, so our state pension, pension credit, etc., all of the initiatives that they're now doing on their service modernisation, all the hypotheses are built around this as well. So if we do this, we expect to change that. If we do this, we hope this doesn't change. But they look across all of the facets with each initiative, so to say, they make sure that they've covered everything in the work that they're doing. And then finally, in the service modernisation programme, part of their business reference architecture has got a value model where they're starting to define their outcomes, drive their objectives, and change themes. So as I say, early days, but we've positioned some of this activity in these places so that the information flow is a lot more efficient. And I have no idea how long that took.
Thank you very much, Ryan, and sorry about the slide issues. Again, if you're watching us online or in the room and don't want to put your hand up, it's bit.ly/databytes50 to get onto the Slido. That's all lowercase. Who would like to ask the first question? I'll start in the room, though I do have them flowing in online already. We've got one at the front, and I'll come to you next.
Thanks. Paul Atherton again. Different hat this time, though. Creative of the Museum of Homelessness. You mentioned something about consumer licenses being given to all people at the DWP. Is that something to do with data, or is that something completely?
So it's more. So we've got we have a technology solution to deliver management information, and what we're trying to do is develop that to be vendor agnostic. At the minute, we do have a vendor. Part of that is making sure that people can consume the management information that's published. So you have a set of developers who will develop the management information, and then people will have effectively a login to be able to access that management information. So that's what I meant by that, is that everyone with a DWP email address can access our MI systems and access through our, with the right authentication, can access the things that they should have access to. But we're trying to build our processes around this and our structures around this to be as vendor agnostic as possible.
Thanks.
Great, thank you. I'm going to go online for the next question from Anonymous. Who defines the value, is the question.
So the spokes define the value, that's their context. So what we're trying to do is put a framework around that so it's consistently defined effectively. So we know that when I'm looking at a lot of the reports that are produced through our systems, I want to be able to challenge the services to go, so what value does this represent in your context? So at the minute, everybody is publishing lots of information to make lots of decisions. From the flip side of things, I've got to make sure I'm looking after a system that contains lots of different reports, and people may come to me and go, what information do you have? So we're developing an MI kind of catalogue that will link with some of the work Giuseppe's doing with the data catalogue. And then we can then consistently look across effectively the estate of reports that we've got. We can then start to challenge and go, well, hang on a minute, this part of the department is using this thing in an inconsistent way to this area. And we can host a conversation that might say, well, that's actually perfectly legitimate because of X, Y, and Z. So we're trying to support that consistency, but respect the kind of context in which the services are being delivered.
Great, thank you. We had a question 3 rows back, the gentleman in the grey.
Thank you. David Duran, one of the things that Craig talked about earlier was data in a cross-government context. I was wondering, as part of the development of this strategy, have you identified other organisations in government that would benefit from the data that you're working on? And if so, how you're gathering their user needs and making sure it's part of this development?
So I mentioned that we're kind of reforming the kind of central part of the data and analytics department into a data hub. Part of that data hub is our Chief Data Office, and they're responsible for looking at that type of activity. So understanding the data that we've got, who needs it, understanding the data that we need, who's got it, and starting to put the data sharing agreements in place and things like that. The framework that we're talking about from a decision-making perspective, and making sure we've got data professionals embedded in the different areas that are developing those services, can help support understanding where information might be obtained from. So not directly in my role, but as part of the kind of formation of and running of the data hub.
Thanks. I'm going to go online for the next question. Another anonymous one. What have been the challenges implementing the value framework so far?
The understanding what it is has been part of the challenge so far, because we're not proposing that this is a decision-making framework. So decision-making frameworks exist within the spoke context. So things like program governance or operational management, those decision-making structures exist. We're not proposing that this is a measurement framework. So people are free to decide what their measures are and work. What we're proposing is this is a structure that can support both of those things. And because it's effectively so a lot of this was born out of our work with our content designers in previous kind of incarnations of this. So it's effectively a controlled vocabulary. It's an information architecture. It's a set of taxonomies that come together. So understanding what that is in a data context, or understanding what that is in a decision-making context, when actually it draws the two together, probably the biggest challenge. What is it? How does it work? So what we found best is you can apply it in the different places, and it works. And then the hypothesis is that it'll improve the information flow around the system.
Great, thank you. Got time for another one from in the room. I saw the hand up there first, towards the back. Sorry.
Thank you, Jacqueline Tomlinson from MOJ. In another reference back to Craig's talk earlier on. Do you find that your stakeholders need to be incentivised to work with you and provide the data, or are they quite willing to work with you?
It's a great question. There's a few. Part of the data strategy that we're rolling out is, and part of the hub and spoke kind of ethos really, is to also address the responsibilities that people have got on that spoke side. So education and understanding of actually you're part of a system where the data does need to flow. And also if you're modernising your service, then part of your kind of team setup, the footprint that you've got in your area, depending on the stage of development you're at, should really include some data professionals that understand. So we've done, as part of the hub and spoke implementation, we've got a few pilot areas. One of those is in later life that I mentioned before. And so the service teams that are developing our state pension and pension credit services have got a footprint of data engineers, data scientists, digital performance analysts, product managers associated with data, who are working hand in hand with the service teams and working hand. So you've got partnership between data and service at an engineering level, partnership between analytics and design at that level, and then understanding from a product perspective who needs the data and where it will go. So early days and some really positive bits of work, but part of the ambition of the data strategy is to scale it.
Thanks. I'm going to go online for the next question. This is from Simon at Public Digital. How do you protect a measure from being a target? And he notes the generalisation of Goodhart's law: when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure.
So a lot of that is embedded in the kind of decision making. So one of the things I think you can do is understand the context in which information is being used. So if somebody is using, I didn't go into the detail, but there's things in there about leading indicators, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If we're using information in a particular context to represent a certain amount of value or certain type of value, then that's, I think, where certain things can go awry. So it might be so we can start to host those conversations and say, well, actually, how about this? Or we've got a new data source, how about this? So I think sometimes targets are associated with the metrics themselves. And so what we can do is start to have the conversations about what value that metric represents and start to support those conversations.
Great. And that takes us perfectly to time. Ryan, thank you very much indeed. Now you've had a preview already, so act surprised when you see the slides. But our next speakers are Philip and Finn.
Thanks. Thank you, Gavin. So if you have been to a Data Bites in the previous guys, you might know the Institute for Government already. If you don't, we're a non-partisan think tank based just across the park with a mission of improving government effectiveness. We are going to talk you through the IFG Ministers Database. So what is the IFG Ministers Database? It is a database that we hold with all ministerial appointments going back to 1979, basically who did what role for what time period, along with a bit of biographical information about the post holder and a few characteristics of kind of how they did the post, so whether they were a full cabinet minister or attending cabinet, things like that. In total, we're talking about 1,100 individuals since 1979 and about 3,500 individual appointments. And we've recently turned it into a public resource, so given it a web presence and allowed other people to have some fun with it.
Hopefully this works. So we identified 4 key use cases when we made the data public that we wanted to sort of embed in the website. We wanted people to be able to sort of look up a minister, so find all the roles that Michael Gove has held since 2010, for instance. We wanted people to be able to search by ministerial role, so find every Chancellor of the Exchequer since 1979. We wanted people to be able to view the entire government, so see who is in office on any date between the present and the formation of the Thatcher government. And finally, we wanted people to be able to see ministerial exits and appointments between 2 dates. So everyone who's come into office since, for instance, the formation of the Cameron government in 2010. And just to give you a look at what the website looks like, hopefully this video should autoplay. So this is what you see when you go on the website. We have, firstly, IFG branded timelines. Anyone who's followed the Institute for Government's reshuffle coverage will be familiar with these from years past. We've now fully automated it, and Philip is going to talk us through that. You can see a data table, so the rows of all the data in the database, and crucially, a download data button. So we want to make this data available as widely as possible, so you can go away and download a CSV for every one of these queries. This database has been sort of a long time coming, so it's taken several years worth of development. We've used it behind the scenes for IFG reshuffle coverage for a number of years, and a number of colleagues, including Gavin, have been involved with building the database. It draws on a whole variety of sources, none of which we feel is quite complete or quite as accurate as the data we've pulled together. So we've looked through hundreds of newspapers, we've crawled gov.uk, we've used the Parliament API, we've drawn on the Cabinet Office list of ministerial responsibilities, Hansard, and Butler and Butler's British Political Facts, which for anyone who's ever used it is a hard copy book containing all of the ministers since, I think, 1900, which is a brilliant resource, but not easily searchable, only available in paper. And so we try to draw them together in a new digital resource. We use it for a whole variety of our own internal research. So we've used it to cover reshuffles and for our live blog content. So we produce, for instance, this chart showing the number of ministerial posts in each department and how that changed at the election. So, for instance, the Cabinet Office got smaller when the Starmer government was formed, but other departments got bigger. Notably, there are far more Lords Whips now than there were before. We've used it for our explainers. So we produced charts documenting the size of the Cabinet and the changing shape of the Cabinet since 1979. This is a kind of chart we've produced prior to launching the database, but previously it was produced in Excel using sort of manually inputted data, and we think this is a much more foolproof way to produce it, much less chance of data error. We've used it for our reports, tracking the number of government reshuffles in the case for keeping ministers in post for longer. And Philip is going to talk about how we've turned it into a public resource.
So, as Finn says, we've used it internally for a long time. Our rationale for turning it into a public resource was really so that, we knew that there was sort of demand for it. We've for some while shared cuts of the data with journalists, particularly around reshuffles, academics who get in touch asking about it. But that kind of relied on you knowing that it existed in the first place. We also thought that by getting it out into the public domain, there are more people talking about the kind of topics that we're interested in. So things like ministerial churn is a perennial IFG hobby horse, and the more people we have talking about the problems of ministerial churn, the better from our perspective. And so in terms of how we went about turning it into a public resource, it was quite a new thing for the IFG. We haven't really done kind of a digital product like this before. So we started off, stuck out a call on social media and got some really useful input from various people, particularly on kind of the technology to use and people's advice there. Also spoke to people like My Society who are working in a very similar space and got their advice. Along the way, it was a nice excuse to improve some of the data that we held. So, I mean, some of that was a very manual task. Finn spent hours crawling through newspaper archives, etc. Other bits, we did things like pulling in data from the gov.uk APIs, post 2010, that was quite useful. We held a lot of people under their generic job title, so we're able to pull in data from gov.uk, match it to our database, and pull in some more accurate job titles in some cases. Also use things like the Parliament APIs to get constituency data So it was good excuse to add to the database. We also couldn't have done this all ourselves. We don't have the skills in-house to do it. So worked with a couple of external partners, worked with Soapbox for our web agency, and Open Innovations, formerly ODI Leads, who made all of the timeline charts. So yeah, found it a very useful process working with them. We are very keen that people use the data. So as well as the web front end, which can do queries and download kind of limited cuts of the data, we've put all of the data and some of the code on GitHub with a Creative Commons by attribution license. So please do take a look. Ideally, we'd love people to be making pull requests and mashing it up using ways that we haven't even thought of. And I think that is pretty much it. Yeah, please drop us a line we'd love to hear about if you've got use cases, if there are things you'd like to know more about it, do get in touch.
A long way since it was a Microsoft Access database with an Excel front end. For those of you watching us online, again, please do use Slido. It's bit.ly/databytes50, all lowercase, if you're not already on that page. Who'd like to ask the first question? I've got one at the back there.
Hi there, Terence Eden. It looks like a fantastic resource, and well done for making it open source. I'm curious how, when you say you sort of track changes. So a position like Chancellor has been Chancellor for however many 100 years, but Ministers for Education are in like different departments and sometimes they merge and split. So can you track education as a topic, or is it very much tied to, well, it was DFE then and it's Department for Schools now, or whatever it was?
So we have linked together organisations and have kind of worked out all of the MOG changes that have happened over the past 30 plus years. The tracking individual jobs is a bit harder. We don't have all of the information we would need on the exact responsibilities that sit under a particular post. So one of the things you can do on the web front end is you can look for what we refer to as like related roles. We've mostly just worked on kind of keywords that are within the job title. So if it's got skills in the title, it will pull you up other titles, other posts that have got skills in. It's slightly more sophisticated than that, where we're aware of things. So we know that the Secretary of State for Children, Schools and Families is in some way akin to the Secretary of State for Education. So we've added in some links like that, but it isn't hugely sophisticated in terms of that.
I'll go online for the next question. You mentioned this was a new type of output for the IFG. Given its success, do you have any ideas for possible future products?
I mean, it's a great question. Maybe we both have a crack at that one. One thing that has come up internally is the idea of doing something similar for senior civil servants. So, a perm secretary's database and tracking the career history of perm secs. This may be, it was quite time-consuming to produce this. We may be not sure whether management wants to put the time into us making a perm sex database, but I think it'd be quite a fun thing to do.
I think Philip is also not necessarily going to volunteer to produce another database. He's our sole data scientist at the moment, so it's quite a big commitment for him to produce a whole other database.
Great, I'll come into the room for the next one. We've got a question there.
Hi. Since you have access to Hansard and other records, would you be connecting their voting records, for example, the expenses they have claimed, or people like Suella Burnman who was fired twice for doing something that, some kind of, not just for that kind of thing, but there's a whole lot of data available and is already there. Would you be sort of spreading the tentacles and sort of linking wherever it goes, or there are going to be some restrictions? Or
Thank you. I'm going to add a question from online to that as well, which is, has any consideration been given to adding the Parliament member IDs to allow easier cross-referencing with their APIs?
Yes, we have them on the data. So if you download it from GitHub, it's got all of the parliamentary IDs on. When we went out and talked to people, that was one of the main takeaways, that if you put parliamentary identifiers on it, you can more or less link it to any of the other data sets that you might want to. Lots of other public data sets. I think there are some additional bits that we would quite like to get in there. I don't think this is ever going to be sort of an all singing, all dancing data, anything you could possibly want about ministers. But that's where we're really hoping that other people will pick it up, join it up with some of these other data sets, and interested to see what other people come up with.
Great, I'll come back into the room for the next question. Any more questions in the room? I can see a hand at the back, or towards the back.
Hi, Lauren, Government Internal Audit Agency. I think it looks like a brilliant tool, like well done for all the hard work that's definitely gone into it. Do you have any use cases for how others have used it already, and how are you planning to kind of measure the value of it?
I think one of the big users so far have been journalists who use it a lot during reshuffles, not only to see sort of to highlight issues like ministerial churn, so calculating the number of education secretaries we've had since 2010, but also to track sort of office holders coming and going between different posts, so you can sort of track the way in which Chancellor of the Exchequer come up through certain departments, or defence secretaries have a particular kind of ministerial experience before they take on the job. And I think journalists use it for those kind of queries. Academics use it in a slightly different way. We've worked with some academics in the University of Southampton recently who have done some projects around gender, using one of our other resources, which isn't a database, is our archive of interviews with former ministers. We have an archive of 150 plus exit interviews with government ministers in office since 2010. And they've combined the two, or are beginning to combine the two, to look at sort of gender and whether sort of the experience of male and female ministers, I think, differ. And our database is a really good way to work out how many male and female ministers there were on a particular date, and cut out sort of one stage of the research process.
And if I take the bit on kind of assessing the value or the use of it, I guess there's some stuff that is easy to quantify, and then there's some stuff which is probably going to be harder to quantify. So the kind of a more informed public debate on things like ministerial churn is always going to be quite tricky to quantify. I guess the things that we are a bit more able to measure and to track are things like usage, so user stats online, but also things like citations by the press or in academic papers are going to be the things that we're keeping an eye out for.
I'm going to squeeze in a final question from online. Of all the uses of data by others, which was the one you most enjoyed?
What have people done with it? I mean, this is slightly, it's related to the database, slightly outside the scope. I don't know whether anyone saw in July 2022 when Boris Johnson was hit with a record number of resignations on one day, and there was a very famous IFG chart knocking around where the number of resignations skyrocketed. Somebody liked that so much that they turned it into a cross stitch. I think that's my favourite ever use of IFG data, which is kind of in this territory.
I mean, mine's very similar. I think Gavin turned quite a few of our ministers' charts into is it sonification, you call it?
Sonification, I think music would be the wrong word, but sonification is probably the right one.
So you can go away and find those online.
Or he's promised a recitation in the pub later, so.
Well, there's a reason to join us in the pub. Finn and Philip, thank you very much indeed. there was another question from Anonymous there, which was, can volume of Gavin's jokes be added to your resource timeline? Which 3 people upvoted, goodness knows why. A few quick parish notices before I release you back into the world. You will be able to watch this back already on YouTube or Slido, and there will be a blog post with various links and slides and some audio to follow. The next Data Bites will be on Wednesday, the 4th of December, here at Broadway House. Please do come along. As I mentioned, one of the topics we'll be looking at data practice in local government, and we'll be confirming other speakers soon. If you do have any ideas for speakers or would like to offer yourself, please do come and speak to us afterwards or at events@public.digital. And finally, 3 very big thank yous to finish. First of all, for Public Digital for hosting. To all of you for coming, whether you're in the room or joining us online. Thank you for all the great questions. And finally, please join me in a round of applause to thank our 5 brilliant speakers this evening. Thank you very much indeed.